The United Arab Emirates has been using retired U.S. troops to beef up its military, according to a new report in the Washington Post. The article details the long and complicated relationship between the U.S. and the Persian Gulf nation. It is the world's third largest buyer of American-made weapons, behind Saudi Arabia and Australia. Emirati armed forces have fought alongside U.S. troops in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. The UAE allows the U.S. to station thousands of troops within its borders and provides a port of call for its ships. Over the past 7 years, 280 military retirees have sought federal authorization to work for the UAE. Among them is retired General James Mattis, who served as Secretary of Defense during the Trump administration. Craig Whitlock and Nate Jones join me now to talk about their report for The Post. Craig is an investigative reporter, and Nate handles Freedom of Information Act requests. So, Craig, put the UAE on the map for us. I don't mean just geographically. How does the UAE fit into American national interests?
Well, for a number of reasons, the United Arab Emirates has sort of taken on an outsized importance for U.S. foreign policy. It's a very small country. It's right on the Persian Gulf. It only has about 1 million Emirati citizens, so about 7 to 8 million people live there who are expatriates or immigrant workers. It includes the cities of Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and they have a lot of money, particularly from gas and oil. They've also been working closely, as you described, with the U.S. military over the last several years, dating back to the war in Iraq and also in Afghanistan. But they've also turned into a big hirer of retired U.S. military personnel who are looking for jobs once they leave U.S. uniform. They offer maybe double or triple the salary to do the same thing they did for the Pentagon. They can take those jobs and do the same thing out of uniform for the United Arab Emirates.
And Nate, what do they do? What are they in fact doing, these former U.S. military members? I mean, are they participating in actual drills? Are they getting into uniform? What role are they playing?
Sure. It runs the gamut from generals going to advise on strategy and tactics, all the way down to people working on helicopters and training troops. So there's a large swath from low to high of these 280 people that applied are from all stations in the U.S. military.
And Craig, the State Department and Pentagon allow this. These, as I understand it, the military, former military officials get clearance. So is this about these military officials participating with a country that is, on the one hand, a U.S. ally, on the other hand, is a repressive regime, perhaps one of the among the most repressive ones, which is obviously counter to U.S. values, at least? Is this about the behavior of these officers, or what the U.S. allows through the Pentagon and the State Department?
Well, there is a real paradox there. So under the law, which dates all the way back to the Constitution, retired military officials are prohibited from accepting anything of value from a foreign government. And the point of that is the founding fathers didn't want foreign powers to gain undue influence over people in power in the United States. And the reason this applies to retired military officials is because even though they're retired, they can always be recalled to active duty. So the point is, you don't want them to become, accustomed or show some allegiance to a foreign country or be on their payroll. But what we found in our investigation is that these applications, you have to get permission from the Pentagon and the State Department before you can take these jobs. But what we found is the Pentagon and State Department are rubber stamping them. More than 95% of them would get approved. So what we really deduced here is that nobody in the U.S. government is really paying much attention to the human rights issues or other foreign policy complications that might ensue once you have hundreds of people going to work for another country.
And so, Nate, if this is just a rubber stamp, is the dot connecting then that one would suggest that the UAE, by hiring all of these ex-military, creates a close relationship with the U.S. So that nobody in the U.S. is going to bother them about these perhaps unsettling parts of of UAE national security?
Well, in fact, that's what the judge in our case said, is that the American public has the right to know if that's going on, or vice versa. And he said that it could in fact be happening. And the troubling fact is that it's happening in secret. And if it's so above board, it's a question of why it took a 2-year FOIA fight to get these records released.
So, Craig, let me ask you a question. Is this something that actively hampers, do you think, U.S. national security interests, these relationships? Because there are obviously things that the UAE also does through lobbying. We mentioned the weapons purchasing that the UAE does to kind of keep itself in the good graces of the U.S. national security apparatus.
Yeah, I think there's no question, John, you're right. You hit the nail on the head, because once the UAE is trying to bind itself to the Pentagon. Now, it's one thing to hire helicopter mechanics, but as you said earlier, among the advisors that they employed was retired General Jim Mattis. They first hired him as an advisor after he retired as the commander of all U.S. troops in the Middle East. He served, he said, unpaid, but he was advising them on military operations and strategy. Then he comes back to the Pentagon to become Secretary of Defense. And of course, he's very close to the United Arab Emirates. And he says in his autobiography that he got tired of when other people in the US government kept raising concerns about human rights. He was very protective of the United Arab Emirates that way. Then beyond that, once he left the Pentagon, he went back to the UAE again. He applied for permission to be an advisor and speaker in Abu Dhabi. So he's very close to that country. And that's something I think that, American citizens deserve to know. What effect does that have on U.S. foreign policy when he's in office, but also when he's out of office? Because he still retains a lot of clout in the United States.
All right, Craig Whitlock and Nate Jones, thank you so much for being with us.